I was dying, and my mother was picking out balloon colors. That is the only way I know how to say it. My name is Willa Thatcher. I am 35 years old, and this is the night my heart stopped in a hospital bed while my family celebrated a party they refused to leave. But it is also the night I learned who was really standing in my corner. And by the end of this story, you will understand exactly why I will never look at my family the same way again. It started with fluorescent lights. I remember them flickering above me at my desk, that dull hum office lights always have, and then nothing. No warning. No sense that anything was wrong. One moment, I was reviewing quarterly reports. The next, the floor was rushing up to meet my face. There had been a pressure building behind my ribs for weeks, I would learn later. Sharp. Cold. Like something inside me had simply decided it was done working. But I hadn't noticed because I never had time to notice. That was always the problem. My coworker Denise found me on the floor, unconscious, my lips already turning blue. She would tell me afterward that she screamed for someone to call 911 while her hands shook, trying to remember CPR training from years ago. The kind of training nobody ever thinks they will actually need. Until they do. When I woke up, the world was a blur of white ceiling tiles and the steady beeping of machines. There was a tube taped into my chest, pulling at my skin with every breath. My throat felt like I had swallowed glass. A nurse with tired eyes and a gentle voice told me where I was. Grantwell Memorial. The ICU. She told me I had suffered a spontaneous pneumothorax, a collapsed lung, brought on by stress and exhaustion that had been quietly building in my body for months, invisible until it wasn't. She told me I was lucky. She told me that if Denise hadn't found me exactly when she did, I might not have made it through the night. I lay there trying to process the fact that my own body had betrayed me. That I had been running on empty for so long I hadn't even felt the tank go dry. And in that moment, disoriented and afraid, there was only one thing I wanted. My parents. I needed my mother's voice telling me everything would be fine, even if she couldn't promise that. I needed my father standing in the doorway the way he used to when I was a child with a fever, steady, present, immovable. So I asked the nurse for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I called my mother first. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. I called again. And again. By the 4th attempt, I left a message, my voice cracking as I tried to explain that I was in the hospital, that there was a tube in my chest, that I didn't understand what was happening to my own body. Then I called my father. Same result. A few rings, then silence. No callback. No text. Nothing. I told myself they were busy. That they would see the missed calls and come running the moment they had a free second. So I called again. 5 times. 7 times. By the 9th call, the nurse gently suggested I try to rest, that the stress wasn't good for my recovery. But I couldn't stop. Something primal in me needed to hear my mother's voice. On the 11th call, I finally got a response. But it wasn't a call back. It was a text message from my mother's number, and I read it twice because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Your sister's gender reveal is today. We can't leave. We'll come see you tomorrow if we have time. Try to rest. I stared at that screen until the letters blurred together. My sister Genevieve was hosting a party. Balloons. Colored powder. Probably a hired photographer. Complete with cake and confetti, while I was lying in an intensive care unit with a plastic tube keeping my lung inflated. I set the phone down on the blanket and stared at the ceiling, and something cracked inside me that had nothing to do with my collapsed lung. It was the quiet, devastating realization that when it came down to a choice between me and a party, I had lost. And the night was about to get much worse. Around 11 o'clock, my heart rate spiked, then dropped without warning. I remember gasping. The monitors screaming. A rush of nurses flooding the room. A doctor shouting numbers I didn't understand. My vision tunneled into darkness, and the last thing I heard before I lost consciousness completely was someone calling for the crash cart. I had coded. My heart had stopped right there in that hospital bed, while my parents were somewhere across town, watching my sister cut into a cake filled with blue or pink frosting. They brought me back. I don't know how long I was gone. When I opened my eyes again, groggy and disoriented, a different nurse was adjusting my foreline. She leaned in close, checking my chart, and then she told me something that twisted my stomach into a knot far worse than anything the doctors had done to my body that night. She said, very quietly, almost like she wasn't sure she should be telling me at all, that earlier that evening, while I was unconscious and fighting for my life, a woman had come to the front desk claiming to be my mother. She had tried to sign paperwork to have me discharged and moved, insisting she had the authority to make medical decisions on my behalf. I asked who had stopped her. She told me it wasn't hospital security. It wasn't another doctor. It was someone who had been sitting in the ICU waiting room every single night since I arrived. Someone the staff had started to recognize by name. I asked her again, my voice barely above a whisper. Who had been sitting in that waiting room every night? She hesitated, glancing toward the ICU doors, and then she said the name. My grandmother. Odora. I hadn't even known Odora was in town. She lived 3 hours away, in a small house near the coast. The last time I had spoken to her was almost 2 months earlier, a brief phone call on her birthday. And yet somehow, she had found out I was here. And somehow, she had been camped out in that uncomfortable waiting room chair every single night since I was admitted, refusing to leave even when the staff told her visiting hours were over. The nurse explained that when the woman claiming to be my mother showed up demanding to sign discharge papers, it was Odora who rose from her chair and stopped the whole thing cold. Calm. Firm. She told the front desk staff she had legal documentation giving her medical authority over my care and that no one was moving me anywhere. The staff didn't know who to believe until Odora opened a leather folder she had been carrying the entire time and laid the paperwork out on the counter. I didn't understand any of this yet. I was still weak, still tethered to machines, still trying to comprehend that my heart had stopped and started again in the span of a single night. But the next morning, Odora walked into my hospital room herself. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly. She wore a blazer instead of her usual cardigan, and she carried that same leather folder under her arm. She sat beside my bed, took my hand, and told me she was sorry it had taken this long for her to step in. Then she explained everything slowly, watching my face the whole time to make sure I could handle it. Years ago, after my grandfather passed away, Odora had quietly grown concerned about the way my parents treated me compared to my sister. She had watched from a distance as I was expected to handle every family emergency, every financial shortfall, every last-minute favor, while Genevieve was celebrated simply for showing up. She said she had seen the pattern building for years, long before I ever noticed it myself. And she had made a decision she never told anyone about. She had quietly drawn up legal documents naming herself, not my parents, as my medical proxy and secondary emergency contact, tied to a family trust she had established when I was still in my 20s. She said she never expected to actually need it. She just wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened to me, I would have someone in my corner who would show up without hesitation. When the hospital called her that first night, the same night my parents sent me to voicemail 11 times, Odora got in her car immediately and drove 3 hours through the dark without stopping. She had been in that waiting room ever since, watching through the small window in the ICU doors, waiting for any update the nurses could give her, refusing to go home, even to sleep. And when a woman appeared at the desk that night, claiming to be my mother, demanding my discharge, Odora recognized her voice instantly. It wasn't my mother at all. It was a family friend, sent in her place, so my mother wouldn't have to leave the party herself. Something broke apart inside my chest that had nothing to do with the tube still taped beneath my collarbone. My own mother hadn't even come herself. She had sent someone else to handle the inconvenience of her daughter almost dying, so she wouldn't miss a single balloon drop at my sister's party. Odora squeezed my hand and told me I didn't have to decide anything right now, that all I needed to focus on was getting strong enough to go home. But she also told me, gently and without a trace of doubt in her voice, that the trust documents in that folder meant I would never again be in a position where the people who were supposed to show up for me could simply choose not to. My parents finally arrived 2 days later, full of apologies, full of excuses about how they hadn't wanted to ruin Genevieve's special moment, how they assumed I was being dramatic, how they never imagined it was actually serious. I listened to all of it from my hospital bed, my grandmother sitting quietly in the corner. And for the first time, I understood the difference between people who love you when it's convenient and people who show up when it costs them everything. Odora never once raised her voice. She never made a scene. She simply stood in that doorway like a wall between me and anyone who might try to take control of my life again. And that was more powerful than any apology my parents could have offered.